Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Marcœur by Marcœur.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
Yeah, sometimes I know some albums aren't really called by their name, they're actually more like self-titled albums, but I just don't really like calling an album self-titled, so I much prefer just calling it by the name of the band. So in this case it's just one singular artist, it's a person, he's called Marcœur, and his first album is, well, called Marcœur. Now before we even get into the favorite bits, I just want to quickly tell you how I got this album. This album was absurdly hard to find. If you go on YouTube and you search it up, you will find the album, but you'll find like different uploaders and different varied qualities of sound, which I really don't like. And when I listen to an album, I always prefer listening to it the way it was intended, in its full form and in a way that it's very consistent. But this one just sent me into a huge rabbit hole of searching for this one, and I found it on a Russian website, which the download took about 2 hours. And let me tell you, no singular album and FLAC files should take this long to actually download. So after 2 hours, I expected to encounter various types of malware and viruses, but fortunately it actually only consisted of the album. It had one big FLAC file of the entire album, so I took it to an editing software. I edited down to the songs, like the singular ones, and then I converted them to MP3 and I added the metadata, and you don't care about this. The point is, for those of you who are following me on this series or just want to listen to this album properly and you really can't find it anywhere online because it's really hard, I left you a download link in the description. It will lead you to a Google Drive that has the entire album on it. You can listen to it on there and you can thank me later. But anyway, here's some of my favorite bits from this album.
Une fois les doigts comme une pom 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 comme rabilu. Il rencontrait une fois les doigts du bilum papilum pom comme rabilum pom comme rabilu.
You know an album is a strong album when my favorite bits are from 6 out of the 7 tracks found on the album. But before I even start reviewing this album at all, I just personally want to show you a picture of the person we are talking about today. Just look at it, let it sink in, and now that this image is ingrained in your brain, we can start talking about this album. So Marcœur was born in Dijon in France in 1947. He was classically and formally trained on the clarinet, but he is mostly known for being a multi-instrumentalist with a peculiar liking to percussive instruments and wind instruments. And in 1974 he would go on to release his debut self-titled album that would forever on change the way that people perceived the avant-garde scene, especially in France. Now, a common description scene used for Marcœur is being the French Frank Zappa. Now, while that might be a good description for what he does, I do believe that it somehow degrades what he actually tries to achieve with his music, and is mostly used as a description to make his sound more accessible for people coming from the West. Not like France isn't part of the West. But I will admit that this album in particular really takes a lot of pages from Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, sounding like their earlier works, using a lot of instruments in a very peculiar way, some of them not even inherently being musical instruments at all. And of course you also have the very unappealing vocals from time to time, with the gargling, the farting, the spewing and everything that comes in between, and top that all off with very non-conforming song structures that simply sound quite absurd. but much like Frank Zappa's music, Albert Marcœur's music also sounds as if it's meticulously created without a single note being out of place and just well improvised. It seems that every single odd note or chord or anything on here, despite being very absurd and very non-conforming, is something that was done intentionally to give the music the flavors that Marcœur wanted it to have. Now personally, despite agreeing with the comparison to Frank Zappa, I would actually compare this type of music to a very well lesser known composer that I personally really like, and that composer of course is Terry Scott Taylor. He is not known by many, and especially not by many in the progressive rock scene, because he didn't do any type of progressive rock. He is actually mostly associated with Christian rock, which I personally don't listen to, but what I do know of him is actually the soundtrack for the PC game called The Neverhood. I grew up on that game, and the soundtrack for it is completely original and done by Terry Scott himself, and it sounds absolutely absurd and wacky in so many ways, but at the same time it does use some various techniques to become more accessible and more fun and enjoyable to listen to. And when listening to this album, I kind of got a nostalgia rush in some sense, and I really enjoyed listening to what Albert Marcœur does here, because to me at least it felt like a new hidden part of that original soundtrack which I loved from my childhood. But I will add that this music is definitely not for everyone. For starters, I don't think that it's for, like, let's say 99% of people existing. It's really absurd, it's really odd, it's very experimental, and it's definitely avant-garde. But if you do like Frank Zappa and you like the absurd sections of Magma and you also like the experimental parts of progressive rock, I'm sure you'll find something interesting about this one. But no matter what I utter in my review, I don't believe there's any way I can really describe the music to you. It's just too out there, it's too experimental, it's too wacky, it's too whimsical, it's too quirky. There's really no way that words could define what this album actually sounds like, and the only way you can do so is by listening to it yourself. So again, the link is in the description, you can go ahead and listen to it. It's gonna stay up there for a while. And I will also add that to me at least, it feels like the intention by Marcœur on this album was actually to create music that on its surface sounds like it's really bad music, but if you actually surpass these barriers and go in and dive into the music, you'll find out that it's actually quite enjoyable, quite unique, and has a lot of sense of replayability. But unfortunately, there's not a lot that I can say about this album, and I really can't go into details because I don't know, it's just so odd. What I listen to is so peculiar, and there's really no way of describing it, so again, go listen to the album. But if there's one thing that I can use to describe the absurdity of this album, is by sharing with you some of the track names on here. So I find that a lot of the song names on this album just kind of don't feel related to anything and don't really form any meaningful sentences, if you even can call them sentences. So for example, you have a song like "It's Miss, It's Miss." What does it mean? Like, what are we missing? Or is it like a miss? I really don't know. Or take for example "That the Time is Long." What? That the time is long? Where do you put that in a sentence? Why is that a track name? Or, and this is the best one, "My father had." Had what? Even in a million years would I not be able to find a better physical representation for this album in a cover form. This album cover is literally the perfectest one for this album, and there's really nothing that I would change about it. So this cover was actually made by Francois Brent. Now Brent isn't actually well known for his visual artistry skills, but instead for his musical abilities. He was associated with Magma back in the 70s and would go on to create 2 Zool-inspired albums towards the end of that decade. Now Brent and Marcœur were actually pretty close friends for their entire careers, and Brent actually was helped by Marcœur in recording his 2 studio albums, but a few years before that Marcœur had taken the help of Brent in creating this cover for his debut album. Now, as I said, this cover is pretty much perfect. It aims to capture Albert Marcœur in his image, but using various instruments, and I believe that it does so fantastically. So of course his figure is made out of a myriad of instruments, which I believe most of him he actually plays on this album, but you can also see that his hair is made out of an array of cables and wires, which actually symbolize, at least to me, his integration of technology and electronics into the creation of this music, which also goes to show how well of a studio engineer he was. I'm saying he was like he's now dead. No, he's still alive, he's fine, he's well, and he's 74 right now. But this cover and the drawing are just ecstatic, they're full of life, they're very vibrant, and I really like that, and they feature a lot of tiny parts which make up a bigger sum, which is definitely one way you can look at this album. So, is this album pretentious? Maybe. Is it perfect? No. Did I enjoy it? Yes, and I think that because all of that, it will get a very fitting rating of 8 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Stand Up by Jethro Tull. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Walnum and Wrist of Kings. You guys are the best. So if anyone wants to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.